What's up, design family, and welcome to another episode of FittDesign TV. So glad to have you back. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We discuss all things sportswear, manufacturing, and design. On today's episode, we'll be looking at the definitive how-to guide on understanding fabrics. If you guys have ever been confused by the topic of fabrics, approached a supplier, or been overwhelmed by the many swatches that are out there, watch this video because I'm going to be taking you step by step through the different terminologies that you need to understand when discussing and buying fabrics so that you can approach your next supplier with a much better idea on what you're looking for and how to communicate to them. You're going to come off looking a lot more professional, confident, and you might even get a better deal on your fabrics. Hey guys, and welcome to FittDesign TV. So glad to have you here. On this channel, we discuss all things sports fashion, graphic design, manufacturing, and technology. We'll discuss key topics, answer pressing questions, and provide actionable steps on starting your own product line. If you're interested in any of the above topics, stick around. You're in for a good one. In order to understand fabrics, we'll start off at the beginning. First, we'll look at the different types of construction of fabrics that we usually see in the market. And there are two major types of constructions. And they are, you have on one side your woven fabrics, and then on the other side you have your knitted fabrics. We've done a more in-depth video on woven versus knitted fabrics, but know that these have to do with how the yarns are constructed in order to create the final textile. On woven fabrics, the yarns are placed together in a basket-style crisscross pattern, and you have your weft yarns that go from left to right, and then you have your warp yarns that go up and down, and they're interlocking in a way that creates your woven final structure. Typically, woven fabrics are more lightweight, they're more water resistant, and they're less prone to stretching, which can be a positive and a negative depending on how you look at it. The second type of construction technique that we usually see on fabrics that you have to understand is your knitted fabrics. Knitted fabrics are done in a traditional knit style way where we're basically going up and down, and it's essentially what you think of when you think of granny knitting. Again, we've done a more in-depth video on knitting. I highly recommend you check it out. Usually knitted fabrics are going to be a little bit more heavier weight. They're going to have more stretch to it. They might be a little bit cheaper as well because of the less labor intensive processes that are needed to make these types of fabrics. However, knitted fabrics are again also a lot more common on the market because they're more widely available. So first, you have to understand, is my fabric woven or is it knitted? And now we'll move on to the fiber content. You may have seen things like cotton spandex, polyester acetate, viscose polyester spandex being thrown around. What does this mean? Well, it's not just jargon. This is a clear indicator of how a fabric might perform and even how much it may cost. So we'll have to understand, what are fibers? Well, fibers are the raw materials that we create yarns out of, and then we take these yarns and then we knit them or we weave them into the textiles that we're able to buy. So when it comes to the different types of fibers that are available in the markets, they're essentially split up into three main categories. On one side, we have our natural fibers like our cottons, wools, and silks. On the other side, we have our synthetic fibers like our polyesters, our acetates, and then in the middle, we have things like semi-synthetic fibers that are a blend of both in the sense that the raw fibers are sourced from plants, wood pulp, and then we apply man-made processes to them in order to convert them into the fibers that are then created into the yarns that we then make into textile. These are things like lyocell, C-cell, viscose, bamboo. Understand first, what is my fiber content? So let's look at a very traditional sportswear blended fabric, cotton spandex. This is a clear example of blending two different fibers together in order to achieve a better performance overall. We're using the 95 cotton here to give it a soft, non-allergenic touch and finish, and then we're using spandex because 100% cotton tends to be a lot more not as flexible or not as versatile or not even as durable over time. Cotton or 100% cotton tends to lose its shape when being stretched periodically and repeatedly over time, which can happen during multiple wears and washing over time. So adding that bit of spandex will allow it to stretch and still retain its shape. So usually you'll see 2, 3, or even 4 different types of fibers blend it in order to create a super fabric that we need to go and buy. So understanding the types of fibers that are being used in a textile is key towards understanding the physical and functional properties of the garment. The fourth main category that we're going to be looking at is the weight of a fabric. Again, it's very important to know how heavy is my fabric going to be on the end wear. On things like outerwear items like hoodies, we're going to be using fabrics that are heavier overall. And for things like underwear or things that are like more base layer, we're going to be using lighter fabrics overall. So the term that we usually see in order to describe weight is called GSM, which is grams per square meter. Essentially, that means how heavy is 1 square meter of this specific fabric. So a fabric that is 230 grams per square meter is going to be 230 grams when a square meter of that specific fabric is measured out. Do bear in mind, and this is a disclaimer, that weight doesn't necessarily describe thickness. We can apply physical finishes like brushing or adding a fleece finish that can increase the thickness of a fabric without adding on to the weight. So it doesn't mean that if you have something that's 230 grams per square meter, that it's going to be thicker than something that is 180 grams per square meter, because that same fabric can be actually brushed in order to increase its thickness and its footprint in terms of its thick footprint overall. So that is something to consider, and I don't want you guys to kind of fall into that trap. Now that we've discussed the weight, we also need to discuss that fabric rolls are usually described in terms of their width. So when we're buying fabric from a supplier, it's usually going to be sold in linear meters or linear yards. And these linear meters and linear yards will have a lot to do with the width of the roll. The widths of the roll that we have are usually, they range between 45 inches, 50 inches to around 65 inches. So if we have a width of a roll that is 60 inches, we'll know that that 60 inches converts to around 1.5 meters. We'll know that 1 linear yard or 1 linear meter of that specific fabric will give us a square meterage of 1.5 square meters of that fabric. So why is that important? Well, let's look at production. We're creating 500 joggers, and we've determined that for each jogger, we need 1.5 meters of fabric in order, or 1.5 square meters of fabric in order to achieve the required fabric consumption for our production. So how much fabric do we have to order from the supplier? You're not going to tell the supplier, I need to order 1.5 square meters. You're going to tell them, I need X amount of linear meters of this fabric. So 500 square meters or 500 joggers that need 1.5 square meters each, and 1 linear meter of our fabric gives us 1.5 square meters of fabric. Well, that means that we're going to need 500 linear meters of this fabric in order to achieve the quantity that we need for our production. So that's why understanding the width of your fabric roll is key, and it's not something that should be overlooked. Now we'll go on to the physical and the chemical finishes that fabrics can usually have associated with them. I'm sure you've seen things like brushed, fleece, peached, water repellent, water resistant, anti-odor, anti-stink. These are all descriptions of either physical or chemical finishes. There are 3 main categories that we'll look at when it comes to finishes on a garment. We'll look at the physical finishes, we'll look at the middle, which is the mechanical finish, and then we'll look at the chemical finishes. Physical finishes are alterations that are made to change the tangible feel of a fabric. Things like fleece or microfleece or brushing or peaching a fabric will create these piled-like surfaces, sort of like Alcantara or suede, that gives it a much more soft and brushy appearance that can actually help to perform in a physical sense. We've done a video on fleece that I highly recommend you guys check out, but that's another video that you guys should definitely look at. In the middle, we have our mechanical finish. Mechanical finishes are things like interlock finishes, which help to prevent shear by adding structure to the knit, or things like mechanical or Dobby stretch finishes that can help to bring in stretch to woven fabrics, like 100% polyester woven fabrics, which may not have inherent stretch because they don't have any spandex in it, and polyester on its own as a fiber doesn't have any inherent stretch to it. So these are things like mechanical finishes. And then the final finish is chemical finishes. We've heard of things like anti-odor finishes, anti-soil, anti-UV, and these are usually chemical agents that are applied to the surface of the fabric that can help the fibers or the textile to perform in these situations. Anti-odor will essentially have chemical agents introduced that help bacteria from building up and binding with chemical odor causing agents, which can essentially prevent smells from building up on the surface of your fabrics. The last category that we're going to be looking at, and is one that should definitely not be overlooked, is the idea of whether my fabric is either piece dyed or yarn dyed. And this essentially has to do with how the fabric is colored or dyed. There are many different types of dyeing methods. However, the two main dyeing methods that are typical or you're likely to see at a fabric mill or a supplier is either piece dyed or yarn dyed. Yarn dyed essentially means that the yarns were dyed or custom dyed according to your color from their grayish color whilst they're still yarns. So before they're knitted or woven into the final textile. This is going to be giving a much richer or a more rich color, a more uniform color, because you're actually dyeing the yarns before they're woven or knitted. However, this tends to be a bit more expensive. Piece dyed essentially means that the yarns are left in their grayish format, and then they're knitted or woven into the final textile, and then that textile roll is then dyed accordingly. With this one, there's more flexibility because you can make the decision on the fabric color later in the life cycle of that fabric. However, it tends to be a little less vibrant in color because you have less available or let's just say visible surface area to get that color onto. They're both great options. However, it's just something that you can consider, especially if you see the terms like Y/D, which is yarn dyed fabric, or P/D, which is piece dyed fabric. That's pretty much the main categories that you guys will have to know, especially when approaching a fabric supplier. If you think that I've missed anything out, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. I always enjoy hearing from you guys and having the feedback. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to FittDesign TV. Until next time, stay awesome.